Hi. It is noon on Wednesday, which means this is Writing Wednesday. I'm Janet Fitch. I'm a novelist, and I'm here to answer your writing questions as well as I can. And I'm sorry, we're going to have trash trucks and leaf blowers and barking dogs and some chirping birds. And it's all summer here. So, I have a bunch of questions that people have written to me over the week. And if you have questions that you'd like me to answer, write them in comments and I'll see if I can get to them. I hope I do. I had a question I wanted to start with. There's two sort of related questions, and that's just, the how do you write? Peggy wrote. Peggy, are you there? Hi, Linda. Um, how do you write away from your own drama when the shit hits the fan, but it has nothing to do with what you are writing about? Hmm. Yeah, because fiction writing, usually you're not writing about your current moment, right? You're in your world, and you'd started out with some intention of writing about certain characters, often not yourself. Hi, Ruthie. Um, so, but all kinds of stuff happens while you're working. And so this question is, what do you do with the drama of your own life while you're writing fiction? Even memoir, you're writing about some particular time of your life. You're not necessarily, hi Toby, you're not necessarily writing about your current life. So, how do you write away from your own drama when it has nothing to do with what you're writing about, or does it? Well, uh, most of you who know me know that, taking notes when the shit hits the fan, writing a journal, writing about the things, hi Gail, hi Nadia, the things that you're not going to remember about this time in your life. Hi Jill, hi Roberta. Um, things you're not going to remember about this drama. Uh, you need to, it's good to take notes so that when you're ready to write about it, maybe it could be 6 months, it could be 6 years, that it'll be hard to remember. What did she say that pissed me off so much? What did I say that pissed them off so much? What was the situation? How did I feel? How did I feel in the body? Generate some metaphors so that you really can remember that feeling. When arguments kind of tumble out of nowhere, if you can figure out what started it, not just the details of the present moment, but the bigger issues that seem to be uncorked while having that, these arguments that come out of nowhere don't really come out of nowhere, you know. And so to go back and see whose issues got stepped on in just what way, but also to convey the kind of surprise where it comes out, it seems to come out of nowhere, and suddenly you're at each other's throats. It's very interesting to take notes on that because it's evanescent. If you don't take notes, in 2 years you'll think about it and just like, how do I characterize that particular drama? It's like I didn't. I was trying to look on the bright side and I didn't write it down. This is. Writers always have to, I as a writer have to work against sort of a Pollyanna streak that, try to think of the best of things and all is for the best and the best of all possible worlds. And that is not good for the writer who has to, you want to keep a mood, you want to feel good, but you also want to remember these evanescent emotions. Hi, Yael, I got your name this. So it's going to be taking notes and then giving yourself a little bit of free space where the jagged tide of what's going on can just be free. That little space can be freed of that just for a few minutes. I mean, that's why the timer is so good. If you set a timer and you say, okay, I'm going to write for 25 minutes, and I'm just going to write like hell for 25 minutes. And for 25 minutes, you can push all that drama aside just to create a little bit more space for yourself. Hi, Linda. You do want a little space for yourself to be able to create. And I find just saying a very limited amount of time, for this amount of time, I'm not going to think about that. Because we have a cascade of emotion and demands and stuff on us at all times. And just pushing it back enough, like I always think of it as, if you've ever read about avalanche, get caught up in an avalanche. You're supposed to push quickly before the snow sets up. You're supposed to push the snow away from your face so that there is breathing room. And that's what this does. It just pushes away from your face. And take notes. I know we all want to be a little bit more impersonal when people are on us, and just, oh, it's not their fault, and they're just reacting to their story, and I'm reacting to my story, and that's groovy. But if you don't actually take notes on what you actually see, hear, feel, you will not be able to recreate that later on. So, see that there's also treasure happening. I mean, it's ugly and not pleasant, but it is important to take those notes. So and then will it seep in? Will it seep into your work? Of course it will. I would be surprised if you had a bunch of drama going on in your life that your characters don't have a little bit of drama going on in their lives that in some way echoes. But can you completely get clear of it? Probably not. But sometimes you take those notes, and then if you want to write something completely beautiful and calm and serene, it might be an antidote. They say Beethoven wrote his happy music when he was in his biggest despair, and he wrote his darkest stuff when he was feeling better. So, you'll watch your capacity. And then Jill, who I know is on here, is having trouble with motivation. The only thing that seems to help is getting into the thoughts of the other characters. So at the same time, as a reader, I don't like multiple viewpoints. So I'm wondering if I should do this as a writing exercise, maybe some guidelines. I think that when you're having trouble getting motivated to talk to the other characters, helps you feel movement. If the other characters are talking to you, but your protagonist isn't, it helps you feel movement. But if you are working from a central point of view, whatever you learn when you're talking to the other characters, or whatever you learn when you're doing backstory, or whatever you learn when you're going kind of outside the purview of the page, will feed the page. So if, your character's boyfriend is talking to you, you don't necessarily want to use that. Although if you're somebody for whom multiple voices, seems to be a rich vein and continues to speak to you, you might, depends on how far you into your project, but a multiply voiced piece, try a short piece, try a short story, and see how that feels to you. It can be done beautifully. Amber Tamlin's Any Man, multi-voiced, fragmented, multi-voiced, really good. So experiment with it. You might not dislike it as much as you think you do. But if you are somebody who does like to work with a central protagonist, and motivation is these multi-voiced investigations are stimulating for you, then use them, and then just allow that to enter in. Definitely as a writing exercise at the very least, to get that information, and you can use it to better understand your scenes or structure scenes where you could have that character in the scene and say some of the things. White Oleander started out the mother's voice, and then I had multiple voices with that, and I ended up using the mother's voice in letters. So there are other ways to work in those voices. Painted Black was multi-voiced. It was all of them had their own point of view scenes, and it was pointed out to me that Josie, the protagonist, was the strongest and most interesting voice. So then the others came out in dialogue scenes, and I had a very good idea of where people were coming from. Marina M. And Chimes. Marina M. started out having each of the girls had their own voiced pieces, but it was big enough as it was, and having the multi-voice was just going to be, I'm not Balzac. So I decided to cut him back, but they retained the flavor of their speech. So that kind of work never is in vain. Here's a question by Jesus. Tell us about your use of fountain pens as a professional writer. It's fascinating to hear about the habits held by individuals in regards to the tools of the trade. Multiply sharpened pencils to not interrupt flow of words, identical pens with different color inks to differentiate between writing sessions. I write on the computer, so I don't do that much. I have problems with my hands, so fountain pen or felt tip always, because I can't be forcing the ink up. My hand will die. But the people who do their handwritten stuff, first draft handwritten stuff, get very fussy about their pens. A colleague of mine, Les Plesko, always did green first drafts, green ink. Sometimes I use different colored pens when I go over a manuscript, and I'll underline different characters, so I can I can see the rhythm of their speech, and is it too much pink, do I need some yellow in there? If you're a visualizer, the different colored pens and felt tips and stuff can be super useful. Okay, so yeah, I'm a big pen person, big fountain pen person. I love these Pilot Metropolitans. They're cheap, and you can load them from an inkwell, which I like. You don't have all that plastic, and I can get a calligraphy tip because my handwriting is horrible. So if I have a calligraphy tip, I have to really form the letters, and I can actually read when I'm writing. It looks pretty good. And I use a very sharp pencil to write in books because I have the funny idea that I'm going to erase them someday, which I never do. So here's a question from Dan, which I think is a really important one, that students do ask this question and writers do think about this. And this is the backstory flashback question. Is having your character fleshed out by a flashback a sign of bad writing? I feel it's a crutch because the author isn't able to believably show why the character acts in a specific manner. Well, that is a really interesting question. Okay. Flashbacks and backstory. Your story takes place in the present. The present of the story is your story. And rule of thumb is that you only need as much backstory as is necessary for your reader to understand what they are reading right now. So we don't need to know when he lost his front tooth and when he, his brother stole his wagon and, what the mother said to him on the father's dying bed and all this stuff, this backstory. It needs to know. So if you think of it, on the other hand, we live in time, and time, there's in every moment, there's an infinite amount of past and past moments, future ideas, but especially the past, that has gone into the making of the moment. So you and time, there is no time in the psychological, the internal world of a character. We live in the past as much as we live in the present, more probably. A power of now notwithstanding. So it's not. So try not to think about working in backstory as much as responding to the present story and rounding it out. So we have something like, if a character is, say, talking to someone, and something that person says, or something that it comes up in conversation, or something they notice spurs a memory. That's how you keep a backstory moment present, is it arises out of the present. The thought in the in the past emerges from the present moment. So you have a character sitting there watching his girlfriend, I don't know, make eggs, and sitting there at the kitchen table, and she says something, and then he remembers something. And don't go off into this, don't think of it as a backstory scene, try to keep it, see if you can do it in a paragraph, what he remembers, and then remember to come back into the present. And if it's a larger backstory sequence that you want to get the whole thing in, the whole incident happened that has bearing on the present scene, but it's long, keep bringing them back to the present. He's thinking about his mother, and the time his mother, threw the eggs at the wall, whatever that this scene recalls. He can start remembering and then speak to the girl in the present scene, or look out the window and see his kids and the dog, or whatever brings you back to the present. And then that goes on, and then go back to the past scene that you need. If you need it, go back, but keep bringing us back to the present so we know where we are, and at the end bring us back into the present. So that's how you can do backstory without doing a live backstory scene. If you want to do the live backstory scene, you just double space, and then you're in the past. You let that happen back, and then double space, or even a chapter that goes back. But I try to, keep the bulk of the book in the present. I wrote a Marina and Chimes. That was going to be a story set in the 20s. But every time I went into the backstory, like little backstory flashes, everybody who was reading that draft was going like, they were more interested in the backstory than Frontstory. So if that happens to you, if your story is actually in the backstory, get rid of the front story. Don't need it. Just do that story that people are interested in. Flashbacks, are little chunks of backstory. But it needs to know. If the scene doesn't need it, why would you distract the reader from the forward momentum of the book? You have to, decide for yourself. Does the scene need this? Does the reader need to know this to understand the scene under your hands? And there will be times that you have backstory that there's absolutely no place for it, because it does stop the forward story, right? So the less the less bulky it is. If you can do it in a paragraph, that's good. You know, if it takes a page, break it up. You know, make sure we come back to the present. But needs to know. When I wrote White Oleander, for instance, I had Ingrid's backstory. It's about a page, maybe 2 pages, but everywhere I put it, it stopped the book cold. So it came out. I knew what it was, and there are little subtle places where it exists in the book. But as a chunk, it was really, it just stopped the story, so away it went. The same thing has to do if you're writing historical. How much of the history can you do before the reader feels like they're reading a textbook? It has to come out of the situation, out of the scene, and only enough to understand what's going on. So the reader doesn't want to feel like they're back in high school reading a textbook. They want to feel like they're in the scene, moving forward, and then a little bit of a side that the character goes back in time and remembers when this happened to them before and what happened, and then back. And it doesn't have to be a full everything that happened to them. It could just have a glimpse if you're going to use it again. We talked about in Under the Volcano how these motifs recur. So keep it light. Keep a light hand when you're talking about flashbacks and backstory. Needs to know. Let's see if we had any questions before I move back to these. I'm reading a novel right now, third person, Ruthie says. Third person past tense, and yet the backflashes are in present tense. I've read novels like that. So the backstory is more vivid than the front story. That's kind of interesting. You got to be really, really honest with yourself. Is the backstory more compelling than the front story? I've read a novel where the backstory was chapter backstories and chunks were in the present story was in second person and the backstory was in first person. So you can do interesting things with it. Let's see. Here's one, Zunaid. Current climate for creative writers in terms of pressure to please and respect all readers. Writers who feel the need to pander, agonize over admiring minutiae because everything else is coming from a place of prejudice. I don't know. That's, you can't put everything into a novel or into a story. Every story kind of has its own center of gravity, which is why when you do research, you research what it is you're writing, what's under your hands. You don't go off looking for stories. Story comes up from inside. And so to have a kind of a neck up story deciding I'm going to write about X group or, the travails of X is not the way the best stories come up. They come up out of who you are. So, I don't think that writing to the moment is where literature comes from. There will be people who have those stories innately in them. So if you feel, people who are feeling they're patching into something, think more, of what you have to offer, what's in your well. And then if you choose to write about issues that are swirling around you, it probably will bleed into what you're doing. But I hesitate to ever like do neck up writing where you just decide I'm going to write about, this group, that group, and their suffering. And it will always seem like a contrivance, and it will never stack up against the best writing of the people who are passionate about that issue and have to write about it. It will never stack up. You have to write about what you have to say, what your passion is. Let's see what else I can offer you. If one is writing a novel, central character different to yourself, ethnically or nationality, and the character, say a Russian character, doesn't speak English or conventional English, does the novelist write this man's dialogue and thoughts in English? Well, I did that. I mean, I had a Russian protagonist of Marina M. and Chimes of Lost Cathedral, and I just had to soak myself in her point of view. And yes, absolutely, you're writing it in English, but there's a cadence, like writing the Russian character. There's a cadence to a Russian speaker that I wanted to, so I would read it out loud to myself in my terrible Russian accent to make sure I had her music, which was a little longer sentence and a little more formal than my own. So it always has to be specific to that character, but of course it would be in English. Should one avoid the first person? I didn't. I wrote her in first person. If you feel that you can't capture the cadences of thought, then you probably would want to do third person. No, there is no format. You have to everybody creates their language and patterns and stuff on their own. Yeah, you're always creating the dialogue in the language that you write in, but it's inflected by a certain music that would be native to that language or that dialect. Let's see what else we have here. In order to be successful, what should a beginning writer entirely avoid in his or her life? Wow. Okay. In order to be successful, what should a beginning writer, so not to be picky, but like what is success? What should one avoid? One should avoid people who don't believe in you, people who are like, you'll never amount to anything, go to law school, So definitely, all beginning writers should never show their work to people who don't like them, should try to cultivate people who make you feel good and who make writing feel possible. Writers should avoid people who don't believe in them. And God knows if it's your family, you just have to get those curtains in your inside of your mind. And when they're going, you'll never amount to anything. What are you doing? Sitting there looking at the wall, those dishes need doing. It's like, yeah. So avoid people who don't believe in you. And that's sometimes very difficult. But on the other hand, the opposite, it's like, what should they avoid? What should you gravitate towards? I'd rather look at that. So what should a beginning writer gravitate towards in his or her life? You know, gravitate towards people who believe in you as a writer, who are writing themselves often, or read, who believe in you, who believe in the whole project, who believe, that literature is a valuable thing in the world. That's all you need. Yeah. Okay. Is the message of a novel underlying and to be decoded by the reader, or is it clearly talked about throughout the story? Oh, this is a good question. The meaning of a novel. I mean, a novel is like a life. What does a life mean? It means a lot of different things. There's a lot in a novel. So is getting away from the idea that there's, hi Jeffrey, getting away from the idea that there's a central meaning is, first of all, there isn't a central meaning, but it's about something. I guess that's, you might say that's the meaning. So what, think about this, of making, the way I write is I make a big mess. I just put it all out there, whatever makes sense to me at the time, piece by piece, so you can't, I never see the whole thing, right? I'm working on this page, I'm working on this scene. I don't know what it's all going to look like when I'm done. So say I get to the end of a draft and it's just a big mess. It's just a lot of scenes and there seems to be something going on, but what the hell? And then I'll sit down and go, well, what is this all about? And I call this exercise raising the Titanic, which is like you look down through the water and you see this big shape under there. It's a big wreck and it's blurry and it's way down there. And then you start pulling it up into consciousness by saying, well, what is this about? What is that shape? What is this book about? And by asking yourself this question and looking at that big wreck, you start to see what's the major point of this book. What's the major issue that it's dealing with? And as you raise that big wreck and bring it up into consciousness, up out of the water, and you see, oh, this is not about a young, it's not about a young girl becoming an artist. It's a mother and daughter coming of age story. Once you know what it's about, then you can start shaping, getting rid of stuff that just doesn't ever fit, and building the central line, understanding where the spine of it is and strengthening that. I think that that is how you kind of develop the meaning of a book, the message of the book. Message is sort of purposeful. It means writers sit down and decide that they want to write a book about, the coming to justice of, something or other. And that is usually not how we write. We start with a character and pressure on that character and kind of crawl. Maybe other people don't do it this way, but I do. And I start, I crawl along my belly, creating just from the ant's eye view. And then once I get to the end, I kind of have a better idea of what's going on. And then I have to go back and shape it. The message of a novel is often very subtle and it's a kind of more of a cluster of ideas and feelings and perspective of the world. And what comes, what happens in a novel reflects the worldview of the writer. Do the good guys win? Do the bad guys kind of get away with it? What does the author really think about life? And it's more telling than talking to the writer. You know, you see them up, you go to a reading, you see them up there being interviewed, and, you know, oh yeah, I believe in this, I believe in that. Or they, you know, even in nonfiction essays, they'll write about what they believe. But I never listen to that, because I think that the worldview that is shown in the story is what they really think. You know, I can come here and say I'm like Mr. Bubbles, and I think all is for the best and the best of all possible worlds, and I can want to believe that. But if you read my books, you'll know exactly what I think. And I'm not Mr. Bubbles. Much as I like to be in my outer life, you really can see what a writer thinks. And that is not conscious. That comes from the unconscious, which I think is the most honest place to be writing a book from. So I do think that the message is underlying and to be decoded by the reader in a very subtle way. When writing a novel, do you think of it as a product? This question. Do I think of the novel as a product? Yeah. I think it is a byproduct of the art, the self as an artist. That you develop yourself as an artist, you push yourself to look at things and decide how you feel about this conflict, who's going to win, who's going to lose, and how events take shape. How the style that emerges from your work is a reflection of you as an artist and the work that you've done, writing exercises, writing scenes that are not pre-plotted. You discover yourself through your work, and the work itself is a byproduct of that process. So it's not a product like a hamburger. It's a byproduct of the artist's own struggle with incarnation, with being a human in the world, and that what you see is the byproduct. Here's another one. Can I skip filler scenes when writing a novel? Filler scene. Okay. I have heard this many, many times. Can I skip a filler scene? What I do is I write what I see. You know, anything I can see really clearly, I'll write. And how they get into the scene, how they get out of the scene, you know, driving to and from, you know, you don't need it. You just space down. When we watch a movie, we see the character at a dining room table having this conversation, and then the next scene, they're at the office. We don't have to see them going to bed. We don't have to see them, you know, making love to their husband. We don't have to see them getting up and taking a shower. We don't have to see them driving to the office. We don't have to see them saying hi to everybody, getting off the elevator. It's a cut. You go from the dining room table to the office, and you're at the office having, you know, something in the boardroom. So filler scenes, you don't need them. Just trust your reader to be able to move. I do like variations. So if you have a nighttime scene, you have a daytime scene, you have, you know, an action scene, maybe a quiet scene, you know, two people scene followed by a lot of people scene, followed by a one person scene. You know, I like to vary it up. But can you skip filler scenes? Absolutely. One of the challenges. I have a friend, Rita Williams, who taught a class in writing a novel in 6 weeks or something. It was one of those, write a novel in 6 weeks. And of course, you cannot write a novel in 6 weeks. What you can do, however, is perhaps identify the kind of the signpost, the fence post scenes that I absolutely need this one. I absolutely need this one. I absolutely need, and kind of stake out the territory of where you're going to build the book. So those will be essential scenes. And so write the essential scenes. Filler scenes are never, if you're already thinking them as filler, you don't need them. You know, every scene has to move. You know, it has to have the change that the character can't go back to the way it was before. They're all essential. All right. And then here's one from Brenda. I don't know if Brenda's with us, but so she asked, do you have any tricks or exercises you give students to help them come up with a plot that has unexpected developments or twists? Being in isolation, my well is running dry. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, you can ask yourself, you know, it's not plot twists. It sounds like it's like what comes next. But twists are, every scene should twist, right? Because if your reader can figure out what's going to happen at the, you know, as they read the beginning of the scene, if they know how the scene is going to go, that should be disrupted. It should never go the way they think it's going to go, ever. It should always go somewhere else. So it's just like the Family Feud, you know, where that's the cliche thing where, you know, 99 people out of 100 would say, you know, big as a blank house. So the writer owes it to themselves to disrupt that, you know, big as a, you know, presidential ego or whatever. Always startle the reader. Never give them what they expect, ever. So if you're in a scene and you're just like going along, it's like, oh, I don't have any ideas. It's just think about what would the reader expect to happen in this scene, and then don't do it. Do something else. Always. That should help. Plot comes from character. Plot comes from what happens when character X we've talked about development of character. What happens to character X, which X means all the traits that are involved in who that character is at the beginning. What happens when you put them in situation Y that puts pressure on those traits? So say if you have somebody who's really, one of their big traits is that they're really cheap. You put them in a situation where they're maybe dating somebody really Tony, and they're cheap, but they've got to deal with the fact that they're dealing with a high spender, big spender, and you know, it puts pressure. Or their brother shows up and needs a bunch of cash, puts pressure on those traits. So that's what story is you take a character who already has these flaws, already has these contradictions, and then you take a trait, you know, it's like you take somebody who's afraid of spiders and you put them in a room full of spiders. You take somebody who is, you know, has these, maybe are, you know, super selfish person, and you put them in a situation that puts pressure on that, you know, whatever this might be. That will help you make sure there is pressure. If there's pressure in the scene, you will not run out of plot or plot twists. Um, if you can't find any, if you can't figure out what's going to happen, you're not putting enough pressure on your character. If you've run out of ideas, you don't want to have ideas at this point. When you're in the middle of writing, you don't want to have ideas. You want it to. You don't want to be pushing the train up the hill. If you're pushing the train up the hill, you're already behind the 8 ball. You want the train to be moving of its own accord because you've set it up right, where there's enough of what the character needs, who they are, and then you put the pressure on them in just the right way that it finds their flaws and it propels them forward. For example, Alien. I always use this, the Alien, because Alien movies have large genomes. It's easy to see. So you have a character who's really good first mate, or whatever she is, second mate, third mate, really good team player, and that's her loyalty is her strong point, and she has all these characteristics. But then you put them in a situation where everybody is getting killed off. They're the last one. They are the one who ends up not in the first mate position, but they are in the position where they have to make decisions. So you've put pressure on that kind of team player. Somebody else should lead quality about this person, and now she has to make the decisions. She has to become the leader. So that this is what they mean by character-driven fiction, is that the plot, what happens, comes out of who that character is and the kind of pressure that's being put on them. So let's see, do we have any other questions? Yeah. What Brittany says, I'm struggling with this and it makes me want to give up. What's the point of my story? Well, ask yourself, what is it that I was trying to get to? What is this about? And really think about it, even as somebody would describe it to somebody in an elevator. They talk about those elevator pitches, but they're really useful. It's like, what the heck is this really about? If you have to describe it in, a line, you have to get rid of all the subplots and stuff and just say what it is about. So that will help tremendously. Let's see if there are any other questions for me. All right. Well, I think that what I've been working on, I'm at a place where I have to decide what happens next. I had a big event that happened, and my character is sort of reeling from it. And what do you follow that with? I'm thinking kind of small and quirky, something that, how something terrible has just happened and you're just sitting on the curb looking at your burnt down house or whatever, and then some small thing happens that it's like, oh yeah, life. I'm thinking something like that. So anyway, I wish you good reading and good writing, and if you have questions for next week, just go ahead and throw them on here, and I'll see them. I'm going to be interviewing a student of mine on the 30th at 5:30, Skylight, virtual Skylight, and there's going to be a wonderful poetry reading on the 25th. I think I've put it on my page here. from Squaw Valley, so it's their teachers. It's their big benefit poetry reading, and it's just stellar. Who they're going to have. Just, I can't wait for that. Looking forward to that like crazy. And so thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next week. Bye.